Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Collin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by second-time guest, Josh Schwartz. He's the head of sales acceleration practice over at Bregal Sagemount. I'm excited to have him back on the show. Josh, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, man. I just kept watching the last one over and over again. I guess you guys caught that in some way and just wanted to have you back. I just like looking
at the best stats.
Yeah. I was like actually considering, I was like, should I like just wear like a Blues jersey and like a Blues hat, but with our pre-discussion, I was like, yeah, they're not making the playoffs this year. Can't, got to hold back a little bit.
Well, if you started the episode wearing a Blues jersey, you'd end up wearing like a Penguins jersey or maybe a Canucks jersey by the end of it,
Could be traded.
Could be traded before the episode's out. All right, man. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation today. We're going to talk about Josh's journey as the sort of one of the first sales hire at a company called Top Ops, and this goes back a little while. But I think the interesting piece to this is for founders or people that are early in sales at a startup. We're going to talk about sort of targeting and his process. We're going to talk about how he built out some of the process, and then we'll get a little bit into pricing, packaging, and sort of bringing method in from the madness. I think that's going to be the common theme here, because if you're a founder and you're running sales for the first time, or you're just trying to build something, there's so many things going on that you don't have time to do it right. And so this is going to be a really interesting story of somebody who's got plugged into, a pretty interesting startup in the early days and then had to, bring method in from the madness. So talk to me about, you get the job at Top Ops, then what happened?
Yeah. And just sort of talking about this, I know most people, this hero who started Top, know what that business was originally called Jay Everland after him. And then also we started a company called Host Analytics. So I came in to, I guess, like maybe his third, venture, had a friend that, kind of convinced me to come there. And I was working in the mortgage industry before that and wanted to get in software. So anyways, that's how I ended up there. And yeah, what it was is predictive analytics and for forecasting plug into Salesforce. Yeah, so that's the idea. Like you plug it in, it shows you your top opportunities. It kind of gives you a better view. Into forecasting, like today would be the equivalent would be like Clarity. So if you're familiar with that tool.
Mm-hmm. So what did you have when you got started? You're hired. What were you hired as? Was it SDR, BDR, AE, all of the above, salesperson?
Yeah, I think so. They hired me basically as an SDR. We kind of fooled around with the name a couple times to try to figure out like what was the best way, to communicate that to the outside world. And we flipped the name around a few times, but my job was to set appointments pretty much. And then eventually pass those over, whether that was, to the founder, sometimes, or like eventually we had hired this like enterprise AE guy. And then we had like a part-time, like fractional VP of sales on staff too. And basically what I was handed when I walked in is they handed me the book, Predictable Revenue. They were like, hey man, like figure it out. Yeah. So shout out to Aaron Ross back in the day who actually came in and did some work with us too. Loved the book, read it a bunch of times. Loved the Predictable Revenue guys as well, of course. And so anyways, got into the book and they kind of just were like, hey, figure it out. So yeah, so the question was like, okay, who do you target, right? Because like my job was to book meetings, and when I walked in there, I was like, oh man, this is so easy. I came from a role, selling mortgages where you did it all. Like you answered the phones, you did the pipeline, you did all this stuff, and I thought to be an SDR would be easy. I was completely wrong. Definitely out of the gate, had no idea. We had no technology, didn't know what Salesforce was. Had made some cold calls like in my day, but not to like that level. And it was, and like sales technology was definitely on like this forefront of like changing, into like what we see it as today, right? With outreach and Gong and Sales Loft and all this stuff. So basically, is like, fit out, who are getting, I hope to for the companies you have. It's like how do you choose what companies to go on? How to do any of those things? Yeah. So, Collin, I imagine you guys have been in that situation a few times.
Once or twice. Yeah. So when you're trying to figure it out, like what comes next? Where do you start?
Yeah. So I learned my lesson, early on, and I, think back on that a lot. But what we had basically did was we started to go to conferences and talk to people and things like that. But it was so silly that the only integration that we had actually was with Salesforce. Okay. And I learned very quickly after going to a conference that was for SAP or something like that, and talking to people and booking meetings with them and us talking to them afterwards, that there was no fit there at all. And I'm sitting there going okay, well, if our only integration is with Salesforce, I got to find companies that use Salesforce. That was my goal. Okay. So back in the day, there was a couple ways you could do that because there were no ways to find out someone's technographics. So what I did is I did two things. Number one, I went to Salesforce's website and I looked at every single case study, that they had with every company out there. Right. And I was like, all right, at least I know that they use Salesforce, so I can find out that information. And then the second thing was, and LinkedIn was pretty new back then. It was 2014, but you could at least run a search for Salesforce admins, just regular LinkedIn, not LinkedIn Sales Navigator, nothing fancy. What I did is I found every single Salesforce admin on there, started requesting to be their, their friend on LinkedIn or, from a connection standpoint. And I had this running list that I was writing down of all the companies that were out there that used Salesforce. Okay. And then that took me to list building. So back in the day, we had Inside View. And for those who don't know, that was kind of the thing after data.com and before Zillow and all these other things. You could have people's email addresses and phone numbers and kind of do a mass export of a list of a company into Salesforce. So that's what I started doing. And just from there, at least you had some knowledge of if these people have the tool that you integrate with. But I didn't know really who to target. We had some idea, maybe it was an executive or what size of company to really be going after. So really we just started plugging away one by one emails and calls to these people to try to figure out who were the right people to talk to. And what I learned is really easy to set a meeting with a Salesforce admin, but not the best person for us to be talking to. Harder to set a meeting with, VP sales, CRO, but good people for us to be talking to. But at the time, I got comped on meetings. So as you can imagine, Collin, I was like, hey, I'm going to do what I got to do here and, mix it up a little bit, but, just call Salesforce admins. That's what I was doing. What we did next was there was this tool out there called Tout. I don't know if you guys remember this one. Do you remember Tout?
Oh, yeah. I loved it, and I hated that it messed with it changed the way your Gmail looks.
Yeah.
And any tool that messes with the way my Gmail looks, I instantly dislike. And not that it was a bad app, and Streak CRM or whatever, they've got a great app too, but I hate it. I personally hate it. As a professional, I'm like, hey, it's a cool tool, and I love what they're doing, but don't mess with my Gmail. It's one of those things. It's like nails on a chalkboard for me. And Tout was a big offender of that. It would things would change and move around, and I just couldn't get over my one little blocker.
I still follow I think his name was AK, who was the
TK. AK? TK?
Yeah, TK. Gator, yeah. Do you think he for him as well? But it was those are the two options and there was we chose Tout, and what we honed in on over time was that if I could send, and this is terrible because I would never do this today, but if I could add 50 people from those companies that I found out that use Salesforce into a Tout basically like sequence, and I timed them to go out at like 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. Like I could walk in to work at 9 or at 10, and I could walk into like 4 or 5 meetings that all I had to do was schedule them, which was this is the golden days of the predictable revenue, like send an email, like book meetings type thing, where all you had to do was get like a little creative, talk about the issues and problems, and you could book a ton of meetings. And that's where it all started, my friend, was just figuring out like, hey, we got to find out who uses Salesforce, and then just blasting out, a ton of emails, from the info we could get from Inside View.
Totally. Now, the advice here obviously isn't go back in time to 2014 and use cold email, because, short of inventing a time machine, it doesn't seem likely. So as it applies, totally. I mean, you're helping tens, hundreds of companies do something similar now. How is the targeting evolved from 2014 to now? Like, yeah. I know the access to data is better, but talk to me about what you're doing now to kind of help founders build out that profile.
Yeah, I mean, I just had an example with this the other day where we just got started with one of the companies, and we're talking to them about their ideal customer profile, and trying to help them understand their total addressable market, all this good stuff. And they showed us a list that they had built. They spent a couple weeks, 4 or 5 reps building out like their target list, and they've got a meeting every month to basically do this. And what I realized very quickly from talking to the founder is that one of the key integrations, like the key integration that they have, which is Shopify or Shopify Plus, that they did not use any sort of targeting dependent upon that piece of technographics. And I cannot tell you how important technographics is. And like, if you have an integration, like where you should be starting and where you should be targeting is definitely there, right? We can always say like, hey, it's above 5 billion or, 100 employees or less, and you can have all of these, determining factors. But starting with technographics and where your integrations are is like a key place to start. You also see that really help with like the adoption curve as well. Like, where is your technology at on an adoption curve? Like, you can think like CRM, marketing automation, sales engagement, call recording tools, like where they were at and where they were adopted. And if somebody, if you're on that curve or a similar curve like that, right, then you can ask for long. They already heard tools by mix, right? So just in building lists and cold calling and then setting meetings and realizing these guys aren't a fit. Really hone in and ask yourself, like, who should I be targeting? What technologies should we be integrating in? Where are we at on that adoption curve? Are we targeting the right people? And doing all of that work around personas and jobs to be done first before you ever do anything is a really great way to start without wasting any time.
Totally. Otherwise, you send your only SDR to an SAP conference when the only integration that matters is Salesforce.
Salesforce. Yeah, we just out. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no judgment on the founders of Top Ops. Like, obviously, they did a great job, and things could have been a little bit better. But it's hard to look back at an experience 10 years ago and say, oh well, wouldn't you know better? Like, I look at the things I did 10 years ago, and I'm like, wow, that guy could hardly even spell sales. We're sharing the stories here to like to share and help learn, as opposed to like throw any particular founder or anything under the bus here.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, like we're thinking about like founder led sales and like how to get that information from a founder, like who just intrinsically knows something, right? And that's what I like to always imagine in like my head is like the founder intrinsically knows something, they know where to go, and they don't always tell you why. Or like tell you, or like can communicate that to you in some way, right? And like being able to pull that out of them and ask the right questions to determine what those things are can help you get it from them to help you get to the point where maybe it's, VP led sales, and then there's a sales team or whatever that is, right, in that process. So
I like to think about the analogy that the sales, like the revenue team org chart always exists, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you always have a CRO, you always have a VP of sales, a director of sales, a sales manager, an AE, an SDR, an account manager. That whole org chart always exists. It's just in the early days, it's the CEO that's at the top, and all the other roles are underwater or underground. And because they're underground, the CEO's got to do them. And as you progress in that kind of founder journey, you kind of get another layer above ground. And it's not always the like, I definitely don't mean this to say like you should hire a CRO first, going from like founder to like, first hire.
Right. Yeah.
It probably isn't going to work so well. I've seen a few people do it. It hasn't worked well for them. My thoughts are like, obviously, you want to replicate yourself, buy back some of your time, to quote my buddy Dan. And I like the idea of hiring an AE first, kind of getting that piece off your plate, or an SDR, depending on what your sales skills are as a founder. But I'm a huge fan of myself as closing that first $1 million in revenue as the founder yourself. So I'd love your thoughts on, does that check with you? And then who's your first hire?
Yeah. I don't know like what the line is, because I think a lot of times it depends on like the deal size and, like you said, the awareness of the founder on like where their gaps are. Could not speak enough, about that. Like the founder's awareness, like what am I good at? Where are my gaps? What do I need? And honestly, I think you're right. It comes to a point where we need them to do other things, right? They need to be focused on other areas than just biz dev and just sales, right? They've got a lot of other things to do around product or marketing or whatever the things are that they're good at. And eventually what also happens is we need to scale that, right? We can't just have that one guy who we're dependent upon. And think about that from an evaluation standpoint. And that's a lot of times what we care about, right? Is like, if we're dependent upon the founder to sell this product, how much is this company really worth, right? Because it's all dependent upon him, not the, not the process. So we have to be able to extract that out of them. Who do you hire first? Yeah, great. I think you made a great point. It's like, where are your gaps at? I think, personally, if I'm a founder and I just want to have more conversations at first, right? And I'm thinking about taking away the tasks from you that are like the least, not necessarily like the lowest value, but like some sort of common denominator like that, right? Like, should you be spending all your time cold calling, or should you be spending all your time talking, and like working deals through the sales process? So like if it's me, I'm trying to find somebody either in marketing that's going to drive inbound leads like right to me that are booked, or I'm going to go find somebody, that's going to work outbound and hand stuff to me that's already set up on a platter, right? And that allows me also, if I hire that first one that's more of like an SDR role, to advance that person in their career and in the business as well, and kind of coach them, to a point that I like. The only downside to that is that you have to spend the time with them to coach them and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, you cut out for a sec, but I think I know where you were going. Let me know if you can.
Yeah. No, I was just saying like, maybe you disagree, because I think you said like an AE would be your first hire. Maybe you want somebody that has more experience, but you also got to think about the cost here, right? Like, somebody at that level, maybe it costs you more in equity, maybe it costs you more in cash, and maybe you don't have a lot of cash.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about trading off for time, right? And to your point, like, what is the right time? And I think it comes down to like what stage of the business are you at. I'm a big fan of trying to get to $1 million myself, because I mean, I've been there, I've done that, and the $1 million is just it's a nice round number. $83,333.33 in month of recurring revenue equals. I've done that journey a couple of times.
How do you know that, man? How do you know
that? I stared at that number for a very long time. Yeah, I mean, I think you're certainly right. There are trade-offs, and like I think I would do it because I know how to hire and train and ramp an AE. It's totally context dependent on where you're at from a demand gen perspective as well. Like I'm a big fan of your first customers should come from the customer development process, and then your next customers should come from referrals from those first customers. And in some cases, that's going to get you to close to $1 million. In other cases, you're going to have to add in demand gen, in between there. And so, it depends on the capacity, capability of the founder. I do think no matter what sales hire you bring on, and I promise I'm not trying to do like a sneaky ad for our services. the mistake I've seen a lot of founders make is like, I'll just hire a BDR. And if you're not coming from sales or sales development, just hiring a BDR and giving him predictable revenue isn't going to work out. Yes, I realize it worked for Josh, but Josh, an exceptional person. He's running go-to-market for like 100 companies and billions of revenue. So as much as is, you're going to be not going to brag about it, but this guy knows his shit. And so the question is, can you hire a Josh? And do you want to rely on maybe hiring a Josh and somebody who's going to turn into a Josh, or do you want to de-risk it and find somebody who maybe get some, I don't know, fractional help around like supporting that SDR? Because I would say it's a very high risk to just hire an SDR if you're a founder that didn't come from sales. Thoughts?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Because I've seen it go both ways. I've seen, the top, like, hey, like you just said, like hire. I'd say like most of all, and what I've seen over the years as got really deep into hiring as well, is you have to find somebody that's willing to do the work. Yeah, and especially early stage startup, they have to love startups. They have to be passionate about it. They have to have that CEO like mentality. And it's just a good example. Like one of the companies I do consulting for, like we were looking at hiring somebody, and we got somebody deep into the process, and like they were from IBM. Now, my dad worked for IBM for like 40 years. It's a great company, nothing bad to say, but like throwing somebody that like has an MBA that worked at IBM for 5 years into like a 10-person startup, nope, like it's not going to work. Like that person's literally going to come in and be like, hey, where's my help at? Like where's somebody to make my decks for me? Like where's this? And like that's just not the situation, in a startup. And I think you got to find somebody that's willing to like not say, hey, that's not my job. Yeah.
100%. Can we sidebar on IBM? I had a teacher in uni, and I'm writing the next predictable revenue, and one of the ideas that we're going to write about is this idea of the selling bee. And my professor came from IBM, and he had this idea of the selling bee. Now he's added some things to it, but I think the original inspiration was from one of the IBM sales trainings, or the sales. Like I remember the IBM being like, the be all end all of sales training companies, or companies that would train salespeople. So that was the place to work back 30 years ago if you wanted to get into sales. Does the idea of the selling V, or like structuring your sales process call, does that ring any bells? Does that sound familiar to you from like an IBM perspective?
I don't know that one, man. You want to teach me right here, right now? Like, let's talk about the selling V, man.
I mean, offhand, the idea, and there's an amazing old sales book called High Velocity Selling. I think it's back here somewhere. It's High Velocity Selling, and it's fairly old. Like I read it in college, so and it wasn't a new book when I read it. So, it might have been like in the 90s, kind of published, maybe even earlier. Anyway, the idea behind the selling bee is that you need to earn the right to pitch. And so you're not allowed to share anything about your product. And I'm paraphrasing and skipping a bunch, but you're not supposed to share or talk or pitch or try and sell your product until you've reached a point of mutual understanding with the prospect. And the point of mutual understanding is where I, the salesperson, understand the prospect, and I have paraphrased it back to the prospect to say, hey, this is where I think you're at. And they have confirmed with me that, yes, you know where I'm at. So I understand you, and you understand that I understand you. And until you get to that point, there's no pitching, no selling, no anything.
Yeah. I think it just reminds me of Richard Harris, man. Like back in the day, that was always his thing, right? Like earn the right to ask hard questions. And you got to understand the current state before you can start to make suggestions. I mean, that's the worst type of salesperson, right? It's like, or even like consultant or anything like it. In my business, it's like trying to tell somebody what to do, or give them advice, and it's like you don't even understand, who I am or what I do in my business. Like, I'm not going to listen to you. That's some of the worst advice, that you'll get. Somebody that doesn't understand.
100%. Yeah. Anyway, I appreciate the kind of detour on the selling bee. I wasn't trying to like work it in. I'm just always curious. It's legendary for their sales training, and trying to track down like the classic IBM program stuff is online is very challenging. I've got some good stuff printed in a binder, but I've been trying to find like the catalog. I want to see the resources. I want to see like what they used to do. Got any binders kicking around?
No, I think, they're famous for the BANT stuff, from what I understand, right? Pick up the phone, call, see if they've got a budget. So thinking about like qualification matrix and things like that is what always makes me think about, IBM, honestly, is like, how do you sell and in what order and what things are you looking for? And, obviously there's a lot out there today. There's the BANTs, there's the ANIM, which is usually my favorite, and MEDIC and MEDPIC and, all the other things that are out there. But that kind of actually goes back into, our discussion around like founder-led sales. It's like, how do you design, a sales program, that has sales stages and discovery process, and, in what order do you do those things, and how do you ask those questions? I think this whole IBM idea around BANT, like, I think we all agree, like, you can't do that anymore, right? You can't just call somebody up and say, hey, do you have an active project? Right. Especially, the business that we're in, where, a lot of times it's, leading edge, or not quite bleeding edge, but it's something new that you have to educate somebody about. Like, they don't just have, a budget that you can just call and ask about. Right.
Yeah. Well, then, I mean, sales cycles are so much longer. I think so many people are, at least something I've seen a lot of is reps, and maybe not so much frequently, but, last year or kind of pre-22, 23 turn down, where, reps didn't want to have a conversation with somebody unless there was a project in the next 90 days. And like, our job is to book meetings for companies. And the number of reps that I had telling me that a meeting wasn't qualified. And I was like, oh, tell me why it's not qualified. Oh, well, they don't want to buy anything right now. It was like, well, that doesn't mean they're not potentially a good fit. That just means the timing isn't right. It means you need to continue to work them, for the next, I don't know, until they're ready.
Sure. That's like the whole education process, right? That's actually why I love ANIM and why it's so good for like developing, early stage, founder-led sales type stuff, is like, just define for me who the authority is, right? Like, even going back to the story from Top Ups, right? Who's the authority in the business that's going to make this decision that helps me build my list or know who I'm reaching out to, right? It's the VP of sales, whatever that is. Okay. All right. Second thing in ANIM is need. All right. What's the need and how are you going to qualify that? How are you going to find out what their need is? And I think I usually like draw a line right there, right down the middle of ANIM, because after that is urgency and money. And like urgent. If you do two things and dig into pain and like help them understand their motivations, like to your point, Collin, right? All of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe 90 days is different, right? But that's the whole like educating them on why whatever you're doing or whatever you're selling actually like makes sense for them. And I think the issue that we get in there sometimes is like trying to force something, that just like isn't quite there yet, versus just like letting that sink in, letting them try to do it internally first sometimes and finding out how painful it is. A lot of different reasons why, timing's not right.
I both love and hate qualification frameworks. I love them because when used properly, they tell you how much you know about an opportunity. They tell you how thorough your rep has been in the conversation.
The inspection.
Yeah, exactly. What I hate about it is reps weaponize it to say, it's not a good fit. Yeah, I don't want this to impact my close rate, or I don't want to do the work to turn this into a real opportunity. Oh, it's not going to close right now. I won't be here in 6 months, so it's not a big deal. I look at ANIM and I'm like, or BANT, the authority piece. Like it doesn't actually. I don't think the authority piece actually matters. If you find real pain and you can quantify it, then you may not have the right lead card. You can work your way up the organization. You also know if you're a full cycle rep or you're working big deals, you can prospect and go to somebody else. You go around them, go to a different department, go up, go down. Like as a rep, if there's a real pain there and it's worth solving, like go find it.
Yeah, and you see more and more these days, like with a lot of the LinkedIn like influencers and like how they talk about this, like And I think maybe even something that the big enterprise companies are good at teaching, maybe IBM and SAP and things like. I was like, if a pro, well, here's what I know about your business and like why we should talk. And if you do things like that and you don't skip the hard work, it's gonna work. I can tell you right now, as somebody that's at that level, go and do those things. You will book meetings with high level people if you do those things first, right? Understand the business and then reach out. And just like on the
back to
qualification thing, like this very silly story. Back in the day, I worked at this tutoring company, and I just remember like the phone rang all the time. Okay, like so you can imagine being a sales rep. The phone just rings, you pick it up, you sell stuff, right? And this one guy, like I just could never forget this. He would pick up the phone and ask them if they were ready to buy, basically, and if they were not ready to buy, he would basically like run them off the phone as fast as he could. Like, because of that guy, like we basically had to come up with a framework for like how, and this is just so silly, how to answer the phone on an inbound lead when the phone rings and somebody really like if you didn't hear the credit card tapping in the background, he was basically hanging up on them or running them off the phone because he thought, hey, like the phone's gonna ring again, I'll just pick it up. I mean, and the next person he's ready to buy,
He's not wrong. If the phone kept ringing, you're wasting your time. It's like a good idea, poorly used.
Oh my gosh. But if you knew behind the scenes, like all the work and like the money that was spent to make the phone ring, you know what I mean? Like
100%.
There's a lot of all the works as onboarding there. It was all theory and no like, hey, here's how you answer the phone. It like actually reminds me of like when you see the stuff today, like about public education, where they're like, I don't know how to do my taxes. I don't know how to get a job, but I know that what lava versus magma is, right? Because lava is out of the ground and magma is underneath it. But like, it was literally like that with like the sales training program there. Like they did no idea how to onboard somebody and like how to teach them how to answer the phone and like set expectations about what that call was gonna be. But that would tell a lot of war stories, my friend.
No, fair enough. And I mean, like I think this is how companies can struggle to build out and professionalize a sales organization. I run into a lot of teams and they're like, there's no playbook, there's no this, there's no that, and they're incredibly successful. But you look at it, you're like, man, you're successful because you have such strong product market fit. Your sales execution is pretty sloppy, but the product market fit is just driving it over top. Like imagine your buddy picking up the phone and it's like, if the phone was ringing off the hook and nobody was answering it, then he's probably in the right spot to just be like, hey, are you ready? You want to buy now? Cool. Or not? Okay, hang up. Because 5 seconds later, you'll answer the next one. And I think there have been so many teams that have been like this. The product market fit or the additional, cash coming in from VC has kind of covered up a lot of inefficiencies on the sales execution side that now that kind of financing is dried up. It's maybe exposing some gaps. I'm curious to, if we go back to the top up story, you start off as an SDR, then suddenly you've got to move into more of a sales role. Learning from the founder, hey, what has worked for you, and documenting that process. I'd love to understand what you did, how it went for you.
Yeah. There basically, the story was at some point we had figured it out and there was a small team of us as like SDRs. Like there was like 3 or 4 of us and a couple of AEs. But like at that point, I was actually booking so many meetings, like no joke, like 5 a day, something like that, to the point where they were like, hey man, like how about you just run the first calls and like understand, like qualify, because this is a lot, this is a lot going on here. So I'd actually been like previously trained in Sandler a little bit. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to run these first discovery calls and I'm going to start doing demos and things like that. So anyways, that's what ended up started to happen there. I was like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I stopped, like put my head down and like wrote myself like a script on like what I thought it should be. It's not a great way, not a great way to do it. But after running that call so many times, you know, like I figured out like what were the best questions to ask somebody to help them like open up to me to where I could find pain, right? Like I was just always so focused on like trying to figure out what was that like specific thing that they could tell me that I could like latch onto to help them and to like sell them this tool, right? Now today that's so much different, right? Like, for example, like over the past 2 days, I'm running sessions with one of the companies I'm working with and literally asking hundreds of questions to the reps, to the founder. You got it documenting like many pages of documentation just around like, what are those questions to ask? Like, what are the pain, you know, things that we're looking for? You know, how are you opening up the call? Talking about like the qualification matrix, like how do you know if we should, like if the meeting is worthwhile of taking, like, or like my favorite questions to ask reps these days is like, when you get a lead, what makes you excited? Like, how do you like, and like, what are those things? What are those attributes of that get you excited to actually take a meeting with them? But that's more like on what I'm getting into today is like really helping them understand like the ideal customer profile, what gets them excited for a meeting, like, hey, why is it qualified to enter into stage 1 versus stage 2? What are the actions and questions that you're taking there? And I think that's really evolved over the years to help document those things. But honestly, man, it just started with I'm just going to ask. I'm going to start asking these prospect questions and see what sticks, you know?
Yeah, totally. I now like to organize mine into like, because I think when you start to document the questions and then you hand it off to a rep, it's very easy to turn into checklist mode, right? You're just sitting there, you're like, you got your Doodly or your Scratchpad or your whatever in front of you, or your list, your Google Doc, your whatever, and you're like, okay, tell me about this. Okay, cool. Tell me about this. Okay, cool.
And I've been on the other side of those calls where it's happened to me. And like you can hear the paper crumbling in the background and boxes and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And those aren't good conversations. And so I think we could go on a tangent about how active listening is so important, but I think finding a way to structure the conversation or the conversations in a way to lead in, you know, to borrow from Aaron, you know, squirrels love pizza, but if you throw a pizza at a squirrel, it's going to run away. And so instead, if you take off a little piece of pizza, you put it down in front of you, back away, you earn a little bit of the squirrel's trust. The squirrel's like, he's not trying to kidnap me or whatever. He's not going to throw the pizza at me. He's just going to let me eat it a bite at a time. And I think that's the same in the kind of sales process is you can't go in and be like, are you ready to buy? What's your credit card number? Right?
Yeah.
But you can start with like, hey, help me understand your context. So I like to organize it into like context of the buyer, easy questions around like their job, their responsibilities, you know, what they're doing. That leads into the pain question around, okay, let's understand what is the progress that you're trying to make. And then the deeper question there is like the impact on the organization. Let's quantify that pain. And then like when you say impact on organization, who else is impacted here?
Yeah. Start to get some of that buying center, like understand who the people are that you need to be talking to as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, I love those questions. I love that process too. Like, yeah, I think about it as in my current state. I understand current state. And like some of the best reps I've ever seen, and I've listened to, you know, thousands and thousands of calls on Chorus.
Don't doubt that.
Yeah, and I've literally been told that my best friend is Chorus before, and people laugh about it. And like, it is true. You know, if you only knew the amount of times that I've sat down at dinner with my headphones in, you know, in the Boston restaurant listening to Chorus calls, you'd laugh. But yeah, the best ones I always hear is like, honestly, like where they do enough research ahead of time. Like I had this one gal that worked for me, and I'll never forget this line. The guy hopped on to the call with her and she said, you know, your voice sounds so familiar because I just spent the past, you know, 2 hours like listening to podcasts that you were on. And like, just like in that like small little piece that she said, guy like opened up like immediately because she proved to him, you know, that she did her research. Now, of course, she said she like took a quote out of like one of those things and like started a conversation with it. But like you could tell just from that like opening, like bonding and rapport that she did her research. She knew him, she knew the company, and like proved to him very fast by the questions that she asked at the open. So that's always like number one. Like I teach people like, how do you prep for a call? How do you do the research? How can you do it quickly? What things do you look for? And that's like all of this like bonding and rapport section. And typically like in our call prep sheet, there's like 3 to 5 things that you need to put in there. And like you order them and like what order you think that they're going to go well in. And I always joke around and I tell people this, like if you just put one and it bombs, you're screwed, because like then your bonding and rapport is out of the call well, you fall on like area target error or current events, I think is a good way to put it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So anyways, that's the start. It's bonding and rapport, and then current situation. So like once you kind of get them going and you have a connection, it's like, all right, now tell me about what's your role at the company. You know, how does that relate to this? You know, why did you take the meeting with us? Did you do any research on it ahead of time? And that'll get you into like a little bit of a flow where you can intro the business a little bit. And then in that intro, you talk about like the typical pain points that you help fix. And then ask them like, yeah, is it safe to assume that you've already got those covered? Which is like this negative ask thing that Josh Braun talks a lot about. Mm-hmm. And then they say, of course, like, no, yeah, of course I haven't fixed all those yet. Like, cool. Now you have the permission to ask more discovery questions that are more pointed about like what the issues are that you help solve. Yeah. So that's like a really good workflow to help open up a discovery call and earn their trust and just, yeah, get it going. I think it's a good way to put it.
Yeah, fair enough. I haven't done that kind of the reverse. So can I assume you've got these covered? It always feels to me like car salesmanship, and I don't mean anything negative to Josh Braun. It's just like it's a trick to get going. And I'm like, I'd rather make the genuine connection of like, hey, I understand that they're on the call to make some progress. I just want to understand what the progress is about. And like, obviously there's, yeah.
And then what's yours? Maybe a little bit better on cold calls too, because you have a short amount of time for them to agree.
100%. Yeah, big change. I guess I'm thinking through the lens of like a discovery call where, they've embedded to you or they've agreed to take a call already.
Yeah. So yeah, if that's the case, I should switch that up, and you're right. So it's more helping them understand like the examples. I can see this work really well too, where they'll like a rep will basically like tell a story about a case study and start at the top with like, well, here was the problem that they had and what we were trying to solve, and like here was the outcomes. Does that sound familiar type thing? But either way, however you like to open it up, it's once again, we're back to like, what are the needs and what are the problems that, you help solve? So
love it. I know we want to talk about productizing a little bit, but I timing wise, I think we've spent quite a bit here. I'd like to kind of finish by talking about how we put all this together into a playbook. And we've talked a little bit about how we structure the sales call. I mean, from targeting to figuring out, like making sure that you're going after the right people, to making sure that you are in the discovery call process, you are qualifying the right people in, you're helping start manage the conversations to, yes, we can help this person. How do you go and document that so that you go from, the founder has been selling, now you're the first rep or you're the, first sales leader. What's your process for, I guess, documenting that and then teaching somebody else how to pick up that process from when the founder left off?
Yeah. Documenting the sales process, and like I think we talked about this earlier, but like pulling that out of the founder's brain is, a not an easy task to do. The first thing that I always like just want to do is just start recording calls. Okay, so it sounds weird, or at least it used to back in the day. We had a lot of pushback on this, but just get the founder to like every single call that he does, like get it recorded, whether that's just like a Zoom recording or use Gong or Chorus or the 1,000 other tools that are out there these days to help understand like what exactly it is that they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're not always going to be like the best with structure, like things that we're talking about, right? But what they are really good at, and just like intrinsically good at too is like being excited about whatever that topic is. And then like they usually also have like these little like sales tools that they're using like inside of those calls that they might not even like tell you about, or they might show you, but you might not realize like how important they are to help guide the discussion. Yeah. So I just had one of these recently where actually two, where we're trying to determine like what package they belong in. And what package they belong in is actually determined upon like how they answer like specific questions. And you can, anyways, that's one. And then another one was, basically like determining like helping to determine if they're a fit or not based off of the sales tool that I saw that was like in a spreadsheet where they ask questions to determine. So anyway, it's like to answer your question more directly, like it's like start recording all their calls. Okay. And then start to break that down into like segments of like what those call types are, or like what are they trying to accomplish before they feel like it should be moving forward. And like we always call like traditionally that's like your sales stage or your forecast category, right? Because like they'll even start to tell you like I have to do multiple calls like to really understand the business. Okay, everyone loves to call that first stage like discovery, yeah. And then what I'm trying to figure out from there is everybody calls it like entrance or exit criteria. I love exit criteria better, and yeah. And then it's like mapping that more closely to what indicator did you get from the customer that you should continue to move forward. HubSpot, I think, does a really great job about this. They talk a ton on their blog about like their sales process and things like that. And like just an example would be you, after your first call, sending them your recap email. And if they respond that they agree to what you said, bingo, like you can move to stage 2, which kind of goes with what you said earlier, right? Like agreeing that that you found the pain or the need and that it's worth continuing to have that discussion. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So just example of like the first stage and like the exit criteria. And then we should basically document that like all the way through to the end. I mean, to the point where I even see, I saw one the other day, it was like not just through closed one, but through successful onboarding, which I absolutely like. The more that I see this, the more that I'm falling in love with it, because I see a lot of cracks between, people that sign the document but never get onboarded correctly, or they have long onboarding times, low, they're not getting a lot of value like at first, and then it causes churn. And what I love about like extending that sales process in a CRM and like having those opportunity stages past close one, because then now it actually helps me understand like the cycle times in those stages, which are onboarding, which I can't talk enough about how much I love that actually.
It is a very customer centric mentality, because you're looking at the customer, you're looking at this through the lens of the buyer's journey as opposed to the lens of the seller's journey or what my company does to this customer, which I think has a huge change and impact on the kind of mentality of the sales team. The goal is not to just hit the number. The goal is to help onboard customers successfully from, we've never met them, to we found some pain we can help with, to we are solving that pain in a way that they're super happy with.
Yeah. Yeah. That like anybody that ever thinks that sales is like a bad job or that we're bad people or whatever, just like you're looking at it the wrong way. It's how we're helping people. We're helping companies. Right. If you think about it in that way, like you're trying to find somebody, right? Like even with like your targeting, all this stuff that we talked about earlier, right? Like finding the right company, finding the right people, finding the right technology, going out and reaching out to them and like understanding who they are. Like this isn't a trick. We're not tricking these people to buy stuff. What we're doing and like what this profession is helping somebody's life be better. Yeah. Making them look good inside of their business because they bought some cool that helps them job company. I feel like if all of us out here could have that mentality, we could maybe have a little bit of better of a reputation, as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that, man. I feel like we could keep this going for days and never run out of things to talk about. Closing it out, how do we, if we take all of the things we've talked about today, how do you think about training that next rep. So we've documented the process, we've recorded the calls, we've got customer verifiable outcomes for each exit stage. How do we take all this and train the next rep on how to do it?
Okay. So a couple documents and things that you should have out of that, right? You should have a bunch of recorded calls from your founder that this next person can be able to listen to. You should be able to have what I like to call like the call of fame out of that as well, where there's like clips that you've taken out of those recordings that are like good examples of how to do things. Like this is the good example. Yeah. You should also have a process document lined out with your sales stages and exit criteria that come from all of those to help them understand, when I move, when I create my sales opportunity, but then also how do I move it from stage 1 to 2 to 3, to 4, and when and why. So that's the easy way. And then from there, I love this, like what we call like certification programs. And this works not just in founder-led sales, but in all sales. It's basically like, and I know you're going to hate this, but like this checklist of things that they're supposed to have on those calls. Not necessarily like, hey, ask this question, but more of like a structure. Like this is what this should like you sleep by them on those, and what that looks like likely acceleration formula, which is the HubSpot book, right? Mark Roberge, is that like you have this little score sheet with and like an Excel file, and you share that with them and say like, hey, here's all the things I expect from you, and you run mock calls with them on every single call type until they get it right. Yeah. So that's what I would expect from the founder. And if they can't do it on their own, then you bring somebody in like me or a fractional person that can document those things and do all this stuff for you, and then train your first person on how to do that. Now, on the other side, Collin might say this person should be able to do it on their own. Yeah, I don't know.
No, I mean, it depends, right? The typical consultant answer when you're trying to give advice that's going to broadly apply. I love the checklist approach. I love checklisting all the things, because it's not that you want to bring a checklist into a call. It's that you want to teach the rep the good habits. And yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Checklist Manifesto. I can't remember the author's name, but like huge book, great book on making sure that you're consistent. And, I know the book comes from like the airline industry, but sales is not about doing any one thing amazingly well. It's about doing a whole bunch of little things right consistently. And I think having this checklist program,
put that on a wall, put that right behind you. Seriously.
Yeah.
No. And there's another component to that too, which is as that team grows, there's this piece to where we're all speaking the same language, right? So if I have like this like first call, like checklist, and they call like, hey, the third thing that you're supposed to do is you're supposed to have, like we talked about earlier, bonding and rapport, or discovery, or we talked about mutual action plans in our prep call, like having a mutual action plan and knocking that out. What happens too is like that call of fame is like, here's how you do a good, be all right. Here's a ripple of a mutual action plan. We can actually reinforce that and have the same language, and everyone's talking the same thing. We can share those in Slack. We can share them on our sales meetings, and everyone's doing the same stuff just because we have this little checklist that we started. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's amazing. I was working with a rep who was previously very good, and, for 6 months, did an amazing job, jumped out of the gate. Great job. Then had a problem around the kind of 6-month mark, 7-month mark.
Yeah.
The results went from like 100% to like 20%. Yeah. You're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And you listen to a few calls, you're like, oh, you forgot some of the best practices. Like,
yeah,
let's get a checklist together. Let's find this, let's find that. And a couple of tweaks, and they're back to normal. But had we not found those tweaks, this rep would have been out of a job or selling at 20% of the quota. And either way, that's not great. But a very simple checklist can be a huge savior when, especially I find reps at that 6-month mark, the first 3 months, you're so excited about everything. You absorb everything. And there's all of this new energy that you're going to be great. And then, the next 3, as you're getting out of onboarding, you're still like, okay, I'm on my own 2 feet. The 6 months, your confidence kind of builds to a point where like, I can forget some of the old things.
Yeah.
And then I see the 6-month dip. pretty consistent.
Yeah. I would say like I add one more piece to that puzzle, which I think a lot of companies still make this mistake. We talk, a lot of sales trainers talk about this, which is like using sales decks like in the wrong way. And if you can marry kind of like your checklist into like actual documents that can be used on like a Zoom call and like be shared with somebody. And for example, like this whole mutual action plan, thing where like you're pulling this up on a call, right? And you save like your last 5 or 10 minutes of your hour-long call or your 30-minute call, whatever, to run through your mutual action plan, with the prospect. Yeah. How often, if on that mutual action plan it says, like we're having like them document the next step, how often are they going to forget to ask for the next step if it's sitting right there? Or like how often are they going to forget to ask the discovery questions if it's in this like slide that you're sharing with them, right? And like the rep can see it, so can they. Yeah. So I think the one piece that I'll like push here at the end is like for all the sales enablement people and sales trainers and CEOs and things like that is like, can you make your sales process transparent enough to where like you can actually share a document live on your screen with a prospect and make that part of it and part of the sales process? Like that is very, very helpful, honestly.
100% agree. 100% agree. I mean, it comes back to our previous conversation. The customer success element starts with really strong expectations, and those are set in the sales process.
What I love to see, and like there's this whole thing like where when a deal gets closed, from the closer, AE, whatever, a lot of times that deal gets like passed over to onboarding or CSM or like the account management team. And they have to like resell the deal, or they have to ask a lot of questions again. They should never really have to do that. But what that I think has forced a lot of onboarding teams to do is to have like really great documentation about the things that they need to onboard a deal. And what I've seen like just work absolutely beautifully, especially in enterprise sales, is if you take that like onboarding like checklist and pull it forward somewhere to like about the middle of the process where you've already done discovery, it can really help you like in the sales process. And it can also help you onboard deals and to help your customers get value much faster than they would if they have to like redo all of this stuff or if you haven't done it yet. I mean, just simple example is like, if you're in enterprise sales and you're in software, it's like getting the user list and the count early. And this kind of goes back to your point of like who's in the buying team. Well, like, guess what? A lot of times they're also the users. And if you can get that early, that's perfect. Or like, what are the integrations that we're going to have to talk about? Like, are we going to be working with HubSpot or Salesforce or Marketo, whatever, right? And any of those checklist items that the CSMs or onboarding team has are beautiful things to pull forward in the sales process too.
I love that. I love the integration of the kind of customer into the sales process. I think this is something we've seen in the last number of years, and I think it's going to be something that's going to continue even farther forward as we become a little bit more buyer-centric.
Yeah. And that's that whole idea, like way back in the first predictable revenue book, as you're writing your third one now, selling through the sale, right? Like it becomes just like this thing that happens when you close the deal because you're so focused on the customer and you're already so focused of having them have like a successful outcome or onboarding that it's just like an afterthought. It's like, oh yeah, I was supposed to sign that. It's like, oh yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Totally. Josh, I always appreciate getting to spend some time with you and talk sales. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing about the top ops journey, the things you learned along the way. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Yeah, always great talking to you, man. And this whole time I've had my little dog here, with me in my lap too. So it's been the three of us having this great conversation.
Love it. All right, well, thanks again, man. And thanks everybody for listening. We'll see y'all next week.